My practice, thankfully, for the first couple of years was almost steady growth, but there were definitely moments in there where like, oh, 3 people decide to leave, and that's a third of my practice, right? And in those moments, I had to like look internally and figure out what was going on inside. And granted, sometimes clients leave for very good reasons, work, life, they're done with this piece of work. But sometimes it was because I was not taking care of myself. And the funny thing is every time I figure out that I take care of myself, my clientele would grow. So every time I clean my house, I get a new client.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Lily Sun, a private practice entrepreneur in San Francisco, California. Listen as we talk about how she found her niche and filled her practice. You'll love what she has to say about self-care. Welcome, Lily. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So I wanted to interview you because I was so fascinated last time I talked to you about how you've been going through a pivot over the last while in your practice. Can you tell us about, first of all, how long you've been in private practice, and then we'll dive into that pivot?
Oh, sure. So I've been in private practice since 2015, actually end of 2014.
Cool. And tell us about the pivot. Where did you start and what have you discovered you want to be doing and that you're doing now?
So it's interesting how I came to this pivot as you're talking about it. I think most of us, when we're in school, when we're in internship, we're always thinking about who we're going to be as therapists. And if any of us have taken any sort of how to develop a private practice workshop, they always talk about developing your niche. And most of us think about, well, what will that be? And when we're in school, we tend to use a lot of big therapy words to describe what we do. And somewhere along the way in my internship, I think, I used to describe, I like to work with people who are, in their 20s or 30s or, who are going through this or that. And what I really started to realize was that I was fascinated that I saw a few of my colleagues go through things in their personal life. A few of my colleagues became parents, became mothers, became fathers, and I watched their practices evolve. That it went from something that was somewhat distant to something really personal to them. Mm-hmm. And, when I finished my internship, I actually took a break. I actually stepped out of the field for a while. And in that time, I ended up sort of really diving into San Francisco's social scene. And I met all of these, all these young 20 or 30 somethings. And I myself was out there as a single person. And I started to realize I was hearing this like very similar stories over and over again, especially in some of my social circles that had to do with, so I do partner dancing for fun. And I met a lot of folks who were in STEM, science, tech, engineering, math. And they kept telling me the same story. They were like, well, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. And I, went to school with a lot of engineers, and now I'm on a big campus or at a small startup with a bunch of engineers. And I'm really shy, or I don't really know how to make friends, or I don't know how to talk to people. And a lot of these were young men. Mm-hmm. And they started like reading pickup artist books and even paying to go to pickup artist workshops on weekends. And I realized most of them were trying to figure out a way to be social, to have, social connections, but they just didn't know how. Mm. And so on the one hand, I was really inspired by that because I realized in our field, we have social skills, classes and work with young, with kids and young adults. But once you're an adult, unless you're on the spectrum, we really don't have anything focused on that as far as I know. So on the one hand, I was really inspired by that. On the other hand, I was really going through my own experiences of having been single in San Francisco for a very long time and some of the struggles of being single here. And my own therapist has been married for like decades. And so it was interesting to feel my own frustration that as amazing a therapist as he was, he didn't really understand he didn't really know what Tinder was. Right. Mm-hmm. So I was a bit frustrated that he could do the best he could to stretch, but he didn't really understand what being single was here. And it's not just about dating. Right.
And it's also like when you're saying here and now, right? So if someone's been married for decades, like I remember I've been married for quite a bit, and there was an internet before I got married, but like
Hmm.
it is really, really different now.
Oh, so different. So
Mhm.
different.
Yeah.
And that's on so many different levels, right? I think online dating, app dating has changed the landscape a lot.
Mm.
It's in terms of how you meet people, in terms of what you're looking for when you meet people. And in some ways, it's broadened the field a lot, but in other ways, it's made it so much more confusing,
Mm.
right?
And so it's really important for some people to have a therapist who understands what that's like and who is kind of savvy about that.
Yeah. And it's not, again, like I said, it's not just dating. Like you may be perfectly happy being single,
Hmm.
but it's expensive to be single,
Mm.
right? Everywhere you go, even if you travel, everything's double occupancy. Every time you go out to a restaurant, it's two, the smallest, the two top, right? And rent is expensive, and so there's that. Also, maybe you're happy being single, but your family or your friends are asking, or your friends have had kids and they've moved away, and it can be lonely,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so other aspects around singlehood in terms of also aging, right? Like you're saying, it's a really different world if you are single again
Mm.
after a long relationship, right? It's a very different field than it was even 10, 15 years ago. So some of those, and also just at least in the part of the world in which I work here, we have a high concentration of lots of different alternative lifestyles, right? From polyamory to open relationships to kink and sex positive culture and LGBTQ issues, just to name a few,
Hmm.
right? So if you're coming back out into dating or if you're starting dating, it can be sort of a very wide, vast field, which is wonderful and also can be a little bit daunting.
Yeah. So tell me how you describe your niche now.
So nowadays, I tend to describe it as singlehood and relatability. So I do
Mhm.
work with couples. I have lots of training with couples and I enjoy working with them. But when it comes to individuals, I tend to, I work with a wide range of individuals, but I specialize in singlehood and relatability. And that has to do with these issues where it can be around loneliness, right? Or the stigma of being single or the challenges of that. And it can also be sometimes a celebration of that and how we take being single and use the freedoms that that affords to broaden our lives.
Mm. And how are you finding that your clients learn about you?
It's interesting. So, like many therapists, I have profiles up on, Psychology Today. I have my own website. I'm actually finding that, and I was given this advice early on that if you build a good network, that people will find you. So, both in my personal life and in my professional life, I've tried to build strong networks. So, in my professional life, I've been really lucky to find a couple of really great consultation groups that have been so supportive, and we become wonderful resources and referral sources for each other. Sometimes my own clients, you know say they finish and they leave, may refer other people if they feel like we've done good work. But even the funny thing is I have kind of a broad social network, and while I won't take clients who are directly socially linked to me, they will often, because I'm very very clear about being a therapist even in my personal life, they will refer people to me who are outside of my direct social network.
Hmm. Yeah. And I remember last time we talked, you said something cool about when you're networking, it's important to be interesting. And I loved that because
Yeah.
we were in a discussion, we were all talking about networking tactics and strategy and then I loved this is sort of this unspoken thing. And when you said it, I just felt like, duh, that's so smart. Kind of like should be obvious, but none
Mm.
of us were saying it. So tell me about
uh,
your thinking about that.
yeah, it's funny that just kind of came out last time I said it, and I wasn't I hadn't thought about it before I said it either. I think it's this piece I was talking about weaving together your personal, the things that mean something to you personally and professionally. That, early on, I think a lot of us, in our careers are trying to figure out how do you be you
Mm-hmm.
in your professional life. And, part of that is we want to keep good boundaries, and it's not about not doing that. It's definitely about keeping good boundaries, but it's also about taking things from your personal life that are inspiring and making your personal life full. So, one of the things that, being single affords me is time.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to explore the things that, that interest me, whether it's salons in the city or dance parties or talks that are interesting or meditation retreats or hikes or travel. And I'm inspired by those things. I'm inspired by what it means to be single in those places. And I don't shy away from letting that inspire who I am. I'm not, again, when I'm in the room with a client, I'm not exactly talking about my life that way. But when I go to professional meetings, when I go to, even like the funny thing is, when I go to professional meetings, I bring that forth, right? I talk about my interests, I talk about my hobbies and how that's inspired me in terms of my practice. But the funny thing is, I go to a lot of parties in the city. When I go to parties, I don't shy away from talking about what I do. And I talk about it in very sort of human language, right? I talk about working with single people or people who've gone through breakups or people who are going through hard times. I don't use big words like, psychodynamically trained or, intersubjective, right? That's going to scare people away. And inevitably, if I have cards in my wallet, if I talk about working with singlehood, by the end of that party, almost all my cards are gone, if not all of them. Because people are interested. They know people.
Yeah. And you've found a way to talk about it that is interesting and that is relatable rather than using that jargon. Yeah. And
Hopefully.
and it's also, it sounds like there's some depth to this. So it's a combination of being relatable and deep at the same time, because you're not saying that you're helping people get into relationships, you're helping people with dating. It's like it's
Hmm.
deeper than that. You're helping
Yeah.
also to be an advocate for single people and to
Yeah.
help people love and embrace and celebrate their lives. And
Yeah.
there's so much out there that I think is more about find a mate. And
Yeah.
that's not always what people are looking
Mm-mm.
for. And
Yeah.
it's putting all of the joy into the future.
Yeah. Well, that's why I don't bill myself as a dating coach or a
Yeah.
dating therapist.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my focus. It's not that that's not important.
Mm-hmm.
It's that at least in my experience, both personally and professionally, it's about my relationship to myself first, right? It's about the client's relationships to themselves first. And so we do deep work. A lot of my clients really are like, in it for depth work. And we're working deeply with some of their early relationships, some trauma, right? And how how that's formed who they are today and how they relate to people today. And a lot of it is working with inner critic stuff because there's so much stigma around being single. And we hear it all through our lives. We see it modeled all through our lives that the couple in our current society around a lot of parts of the globe is sort of the idealized unit.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you are either seeking that, there can be feelings of despair at not finding it. And if you are not seeking that, there can be feelings of stigma or even internalized stigma that there might be something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm. And what do you notice around singlehood, maybe in your own life or in your clients' lives or just everyone's lives? What do you notice around how people are creating family, perhaps in ways that don't have anything to do with couples?
That's the interesting thing, right? Yes, there's clearly still people who are, getting married and having children. There's also lots of people doing interesting things about having children before they get married, having children without getting married, and also different types of family units. I think that's sort of what you're pointing to, that in this time and place, there are definitely people who are co-living,
Mm.
right? Couples who are living with other couples raising children. There are also people who aren't couples, like, in more polyamorous circles, in even like, in that range, there's people who are in open relationships, people who are polyamorous in different ways, people who are relationship anarchists who choose to raise children in different family units or who plan, right? Even if they don't have kids now, they might be getting involved in relationships. And even at the start, having conversations about, well, I'd like to continue having, other people in my life as significant partners, but I eventually would like to live in this situation and I'd like to have children in this other situation. Is that kind of what you're asking about?
Yeah, the possibilities are endless, and it seems like friendships are such a core part of family
Yeah.
as
And,
well.
the interesting thing is it's not that any of these forms are necessarily any better or worse than others.
Mhm.
Each of these, um, each of these formatting of family, right? That's not quite what I want to say. Let me try again. each of these ways people decide to organize around how they like to have family still runs into different issues, right? Whether you're living in a triad and you decide to have children, or you're living in a group home, raising children together, there's still going to be all of the, same issues around communication, around sharing responsibilities, around finances that you're going to have in any, couplehood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And as, as a couples therapist, I know that and so many of us know that the idealized couple is very much a myth, right? That it's a structure that's put way too much pressure on that institution, right? So that even if people are in couples, they really need to not be getting all of their needs met by that one person.
Yeah.
So I think I feel like it's sort of a movement that you're talking about, like the embracing and advocating for singles movement is, I think, a really helpful part of that conversation.
Yeah. And again, I do work with both couples and individuals. And what I think I see most in terms of the funny thing is, sort of at the forefront of a lot of people's work right now is attachment theory.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I see that come up both in my individual work and in my couples work. That so many people are actually working deeply with their own attachment styles and their own attachment issues. So that whether you are not attached to somebody else right now and want to be, and whether you are attached or whether you're attached to multiple people, it's really working through some of those things. Because I think sometimes in our idealized world, those hopes and expectations, when you're right, when we put them on one other person and we hope that they fulfill all of them, it can be really challenging and can lead to a lot of hurt and disappointment.
Yeah, right? You're screwed.
Right. And so much of it is like, it's not necessarily that you have to necessarily spread it out amongst a lot of people, but it's about understanding your own, like, where are those stories coming from inside yourself? Are these stories that you inherited from others? Are these stories you inherited from your past? And are they the stories you want in your relationships?
Yeah, love that. And in your very vibrant life, how do you balance being the CEO of your business and a therapist with your personal life and with having a balanced life?
Oh, that's the struggle. That really is the struggle. I have to admit, it is a struggle, right? Especially if your practice is full or fullish. I like to say fullish because we're never full. It is hard. And that's part of what I was saying was I'm excited that I'm starting to, shape my practice into, the format and the form that I want. And one of those things is I am making sure that I am taking enough time off. It doesn't ever feel like it. And because clients nowadays email you, and some clients, some people take texts. I don't. They can reach you 24/7, and you have to be really boundaried about when you're going to check things. Is it okay? Some people prefer to turn things off after a certain time. I actually work better having the freedom to check messages at 2 a.m. if I want. That way, I don't feel pressured about a ton of messages in the morning. I won't respond at 2 a.m. necessarily, but I think finding that balance is so hard. So one of the things I did was when I built my practice, I decided to go very slowly because I think part of the reason I stepped out of the field when I finished my internship was that in hindsight, I didn't realize at the time, in hindsight, I had hit burnout, right? And I did not want to do that again. I wanted to build a successful, thriving practice that had longevity. And so I built very slowly and, 1 or 2 clients at a time, letting my therapy muscles stretch and making sure that I was adding on, self-care all along the way. So I like to say that when I first started, the carrot at the end of my stick was that I decided that I would give myself a massage, right? Gift myself a massage if I got X number of clients once a month. And then I would go to once every other week and once weekly if I hit sort of like my, goal number. And the funny thing is I figured out, yeah. But I figured out that once I hit my goal number, I didn't have time to get a weekly massage.
What was your goal number?
So for me, full is 20 a week. And I count client hours rather than number of clients.
Smart. So smart.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to, because I realize sometimes, sometimes clients will cancel and so forth. So I'm aiming at about 20. And that seems to be where I'm at. And I'm stretching a little bit like both emotionally and physically and intellectually right now to contain that. But I'm also adding on more self-care to make sure that I feel really like present and available and just rested when I go into sessions.
What do you find as you're feeling your way into this? What are you finding about your schedule, your ideal schedule?
So I have shifted my schedule recently. Like my ideal schedule has always been to work 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
I know of other therapists who tend to stack lots of clients together and work fewer days, like 3 days a week. And that works really well for them. For me, currently, if I see more than 5 or 6 clients a day, I'm a zombie by the end of that day. Sometimes I'm a zombie the second day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's for me right now, that's not workable. So I have always wanted to have Mondays off. People like Fridays off, but I like Mondays because you get to have a full fun weekend, and Mondays can be your, do your laundry day,
Yeah.
go grocery shopping day. And so right now I've actually managed to do that. So right now I'm Tuesday through Friday.
Beautiful. And do you like working evenings or mornings?
I am not a morning person.
Uh-huh.
So and the funny thing is when I first thought about becoming a therapist so many years ago, that what actually played into my decision to become a therapist was knowing that I could actually set my schedule so that I could work afternoons into evening.
Oh, great. And in so many ways, that's ideal.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, granted, it's not fun to leave your office at 10 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to pull it back a little bit. So, and for the last bit, I had been leaving in my office at like 10, sometimes later, not because I'm there seeing clients until 10 every night, but, paperwork and such. But I do enjoy working, not in the mornings.
And what are you charging right now?
So let's see, we're at the end of March in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So right now, my full fee for individuals is $180, and for couples is $200.
Great. And I know fees are always in motion, but how are you feeling right now about your fee?
I feel solid about my fee right now. I've been charging that for a little while, and I think it's a good place to be right now. It seems fair for my part of the world, for the experience that I offer. And it's been an interesting journey to get here, both in terms of like figuring out what the fee is for myself and also watching others around me think about fee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For myself, like many of us, when we start private practice, we're like, oh my goodness, this fee is so much higher than we thought. But I had a couple of good conversations with people who'd been in the field around how they, thought about fee setting.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me understand what I was really taking into account when I set my own fee. And so, 180 is not where I started, but I definitely do reassess my fees annually with each client and bring it up to where it needs to be. And I think the other part is, thinking about where my colleagues are in terms of their journeys around fee setting. It's interesting to see other people sometimes struggle with charging more, and other people who are just right out there charging high amounts. It's the funny thing is sometimes I'll be like, wow, that's probably a little bit too high for me. I don't feel comfortable with that. And then I have to examine why that is internally.
Mm-hmm. And it's so individual, right? Like there's so many things that go into it, including, of course, math, like our bills and
Yeah.
what we need and what it costs to take care of ourselves. And then there's like a physical reaction that we have to different fees, and we have to feel our way through it.
I just think it's interesting that in our field, like in so many other fields, right, there's at least a sense of if you are at a certain stage. I think maybe this is sort of unspoken in our field, that you start at a certain place, and then as you gain experience, as you gain extra skills, you bring your fees up, or you get paid more. Let's put it that way. In fields that are salaried or something like that. That if you are in a corporate job and you move to another office or you move to a different company, you're going to bring a new set of skills there, and then you negotiate for your salary. We don't do that.
Yeah,
right?
We got to give ourselves raises.
Yeah. But it's also interesting how different people assess what they think they're worth in terms of that. And in this area, it's interesting to see, our field is very female dominated, right? We have lots and lots of women in the field. And it's interesting to see even the gender differences in how men and women therapists set their fees, or how there's a whole new generation of therapists who seem to be much more comfortable at setting a high fee earlier in their career, right? And from what I gathered, that was not always the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. And then it can sometimes push the buttons of other therapists of who've been at it
Yeah.
for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I often think that's maybe good for them, right? Like maybe it's good for people who've been at it for a while to get those buttons pushed,
Yeah.
to feel
I
their way through it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was in conversation with another colleague who was talking about a different podcast she had heard, and that somebody was actually advocating for charging a lower fee if it fits
Mm.
with your lifestyle and your values. If you want to serve a certain population or, different populations, that you might, incorporate that into your fee setting. Whereas so many places are about charging more, charging more. And so that also helped jostle things inside in terms of like, oh, hmm, what are my values around money? How much do I actually need to, pay my bills, pay my debts, live, right? And to think about it more, in a more holistic way than that way.
I like that holistic fee setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about your private practice over the last few years, have you been through any scary or low moments? And if
Oh,
so, how'd you
yeah.
get through them?
um, Absolutely. I mean, the scariest moment, of course, is when I started,
Hmm.
right? And because I elected to not jump on insurance panels, I always like to say when I first started, I rented my office and then I proceeded to sit in my office for several months without a single client. And I was still getting, my own stuff in gear in terms of my, my website, my paperwork, and just mentally getting in gear to get back in. And so what I would do is I would invite colleagues to come have lunch with me. And it was a way to warm my office.
Mm.
And those moments were scary because, money was going out, but nothing was coming in. And in the early days, there was, of course, this feeling of if you have three clients and one of them decides to leave for good reason, usually, oh no, that's a third of your practice. And all along the way, my practice, thankfully, for the first couple of years was almost steady growth. But there were definitely moments in there where, like, oh, three people decide to leave, and that's a third of my
Yeah.
practice. Right. And in those moments, I had to like look internally and figure out what was going on inside. And granted, sometimes clients leave for very good reasons work, life, they're done with this piece of work. But sometimes it was because I was not taking care of myself.
Mm.
And the funny thing is, every time I figure out that I take care of myself, my clientele would grow. So every time I clean my house, I get a new client.
Isn't that amazing?
And I know it's probably, that sounds a little woo woo. It's not quite directly like that, but I think there's something
There's
about,
something
um,
though.
there's something
Yeah.
though,
And it might
right?
just be
So,
that when we, when you're talking about how you would find you had a dip when you weren't taking care of yourself, like we're sending all of these
yeah,
tiny little messages out to other
yes,
people. And
yes,
it's hard to even see them, but we're sending these little messages out saying, like, yes,
yes,
I'm ready for more clients, or, no, I have to scale back.
yeah.
Mhm.
And luckily, I'm an extrovert, so sometimes part of self care is going out and seeing and talking to people. So I'm sure that must have some influence, right?
Yeah.
If part of self care is actually going out and networking, I don't even think about it as networking. I think about it as I'm going to have lunch with some people, or I'm going to go have cocktails with some people, or I'm going to go to this talk with some people, right? So networking to me just feels like another social opportunity.
And you're genuinely interested in your work and in your niche. So I'm sure without you having to try or make it painful, you're getting other people excited about your work. So that's the best networking.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was, when you talk about going all the way back to this idea of pivoting,
Yeah.
I remember it really was like the moment it was right after I had gotten licensed. I was going to the San Francisco camp holiday party for the first time as a licensed therapist. And when it all of a sudden came clear to me exactly what my niche was, within about a 3-hour window, even though I hadn't built it, I knew what my website would look like. I knew who my clientele would be. And I went to that party and I knew what I was going to say to people. And that was the moment that, like, it feels like very, like, I feel aligned.
Mm.
And it wasn't something that so when I go out, I don't feel like I'm selling myself. People talk about how challenging it is to sell yourself. And I don't feel that way. I just feel like this is who I am. This is my calling, right? This is the work I feel, you know, most in alignment with. And so I hope that comes across.
Beautiful. Yeah, it does. So, Lily, if you could time travel to the start of your private practice, what would you tell the Lily of that time?
I would tell her, yes, you get to have weekly massages. I would tell her that it's okay to go slow.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if I could go all the way back to the Lily that started grad school in therapy, that's what I tell her too, right? That there's such a rush to get through this. There's such a rush to build to full. Taking your time, and I talk fast and think fast. So this has been a lesson that's taken me a long time to learn. Taking your time to grow is okay. In fact, I now firmly believe that it's going to help me stay an engaged, vibrant therapist for the rest of my practice. Is that going slow, building slowly is okay. Not to be scared. You'll get there.
Great. What's the very best place for therapists to find you and throw compliments at you?
Let's see. So in terms of online, you can find me at my website, which is lilysunmft.com. And professionally, I'll be at a lot of SF camp meetings. I just joined the board this year. And personally, probably on a dance floor somewhere once my knees healed up from knee surgery.
Oh, you went through knee surgery?
Yeah, in January.
How's that going so far?
Well, I'm looking forward to getting back on dance floor in the next few months.
Yes. Excellent.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to make sure to leave therapists with?
Yeah, I think, yes, build a good community. The work we do can be lonely, right? Because it's just us in a room with people, unless you're doing other things, of course. I think what has been really sustaining for me is that, in the beginning, for example, when I started my private practice, the first consultation group that I found wasn't a particularly good fit for me. And I struggled for a bit staying in. And it was scary to leave because it was the only consultation group I was in at the time. But I left and found two more groups that have been wonderful fits. And these people are no longer just colleagues, they become friends. I've joined a therapist book club. And we go to lunches and, we actually all went to the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference for a week in LA together. And it's wonderful having people who you find are of similar mind, but also bring fresh perspectives. And so you don't feel so alone, especially again, for those of us who are extroverts in our practice. And again, we become friends, we become referral sources, we go to each other's baby showers, at birthday parties, at office warmings. And that has made my practice feel so much more sustainable over time.
Excellent.
So find your people.
Find your people. And even, I love this part of it, that even if you try and it's not quite the right people, keep trying. Like you're going to find them.
Yeah. I like to say I love that there's so many different types of therapists out there doing so many different types of therapy because we have so many different clients, but that also we're so many different people.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lily. Such
my pleasure
to talk to you.
Oh, it's so great. And I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. When your right fit potential clients understand how you're different, they understand why they want to hire you. If you want to do a better job expressing what makes you different from other therapists, head over to the show notes at coachingwithannie.com/podcast/56 and grab my free training, Write a Better About page. You'll immediately get access to a video and a worksheet walking you through the process step by step. So again, that's coachingwithannie.com/podcast/56. And if you can't remember that, just go to coachingwithannie.com and click on free trainings. You'll see it there too. And I will see you next week. That was great. There's so many gems. I was like taking some notes just to 10:02 star that one, 9:50 star that one. So